My mother was still breathing when they decided she was already gone. I need you to hold on to that, because for 3 years I was the one who counted her breaths. I learned the shallow ones that meant sleep, and the rattling ones that meant I had to run for the nurse. I knew my mother's breathing better than I knew my own heartbeat. And while she was still breathing, my brother and sister sat in a lawyer's office and rewrote her entire life as if she had already stopped. My name is Karen. I'm 52. This is the story of the week my family finally showed me who they really were. Let me take you back. 3 years ago, my mother, Eleanor, started slipping. Small things first. Her glasses, her pills, then the stove left burning. The front door open at midnight. The doctor said her heart was failing and taking her mind with it, a little at a time. Back then, I had a life. A good job downtown, 15 years of climbing, a corner desk I'd earned, a man named David who I'd been seeing for 2 years, a 401k. I checked every month with quiet pride. I had a future with edges I could see. Then I gave it all up, not because anyone asked. Greg said he was buried with the business. Diane said she just wasn't built for sick people. So it was me. It was always going to be me. I moved back into my childhood bedroom at 50 years old, and I lay awake every night listening through the wall for the sound of my mother falling. People think caregiving is one big nodal sacrifice. It isn't. It's 10,000 small deaths, every single day. Let me tell you what it actually cost me, because the numbers matter. They mattered later more than I ever imagined. First I went part-time. Then I couldn't manage even that, and I quit entirely. 15 years of salary, gone. I cashed out my retirement to cover what insurance wouldn't, and the penalty alone took a bite that still makes me sick to think about. $22,000 in medical bills that weren't covered, the lift chair, the hospital bed for the living room, the ramp, the homemaid I hired for the 8 hours a week I had to sleep or lose my mind. I sold my car, a paid-off car, and bought something 12 years old that smelled like someone else's cigarettes. I stopped buying anything for myself. I wore the same 3 sweaters for 2 winters. I remember standing in a grocery store doing math in my head, putting back the good coffee because Mom needed a new prescription that week. And David? Softly. David stayed longer than most men would have. But you can only say, I can't tonight. She had a bad day so many times before. The calls stopped coming. One morning I realized I couldn't remember the last time the phone had run. That was its own quiet funeral. As the end, I had no job, no savings, no partner, and no idea who I was without the word caregiver. I poured my entire future into keeping my mother comfortable. And I would do it again. But I want you to remember those numbers, because my family was about to call all of it nothing. Greg visited maybe once a month. He'd stand in the doorway with his coat still on, check his watch, and be gone in 20 minutes. He ran a real estate business, and I learned later it was hemorrhaging money. He looked at the family house the way he looked at every room, by what it was worth. Diane came less. But here's the thing about Diane. Diane and I used to be close. She was my baby sister. When we were girls, I braided her hair, I covered for her. I drove 2 hours to pick her up the night her first marriage fell apart. She'd call me crying and I'd stay on the phone till sunrise. So, when she did visit Mom, she'd hug me and whisper, I don't know how you do it, Karen. You're a saint. I could never. And I believed she meant it. I believed she was on my side. That belief is the thing that hurt the most, later. More than the money. More than the house. This spring, Mom took a hard turn. The hospital, the gentle doctor voice telling me we were in the final season. She drifted in and out. Some days she knew me. Some days she called me by her dead sister's name. Dead Mons. On Sunday, she slipped into a deep, sedated sleep, and they told me, kindly, that she likely wouldn't truly wake again. I sat with her every hour they'd let me. I read her the garden catalog she loved. I played her old records on my phone. I held her hand and counted her breaths, the way I always had. And while I was counting, Greg and Diane were busy. It was Wednesday when I found out. I went to our family attorney, Mr. Abernethy, just to update Mom's care directives. Medical paperwork. Nothing more. I sat in his waiting room with a folder on my lap. The receptionist smiled and said, "Oh, are you here about the will? Your brother and sister already handled that. Last Tuesday. It's all signed and notarized." The room went very quiet. "The will?" I said. "Yes, the new one." My mother had been unconscious since Sunday. The will was signed on Tuesday. The new will left the house to Greg. The remaining savings to Diane. And me? One sentence. Karen has already received her share through her living arrangements. My living arrangements. They put a price on 3 years of my life, and the price was nothing. They called my room in a dying woman's house my inheritance. That night, Greg called. And here's where I learned what gaslighting really feels like. Because it doesn't come at you like an attack. It comes at you gentle, reasonable, almost loving. "Karen, I know how this looks," he said. "Warm as anything. But you're exhausted. You've been under so much stress, you're not thinking straight." "Greg, she's been unconscious since Sunday." A soft little laugh. "See, that's the stress talking. She had a moment of clarity Tuesday. A real one. You just weren't in the room. You can't be in the room every second. Nobody's blaming you." I was in the room. I was always in the room. Karen, softly, mimicking concern. "Honey, are you sleeping? Because honestly, the way you're acting, I'm starting to worry about you. We all are. Maybe the caregiving got to be too much. Nobody would judge you if you needed to step back." Do you hear it? In the space of one phone call, he turned the people who stole from a dying woman into the worried family, and turned me, the one who never left her side, into the unstable one who couldn't be trusted to remember a Tuesday. I hung up shaking. Not with anger, with doubt. For one horrible hour, I actually wondered if I was losing my mind. So I called Diane, my sister, the one who called me a saint. I needed her to tell me I wasn't crazy. "Diane, did you go to the lawyer? Did you sign something while Mom was under?" There was a long pause. And then my baby sister, in a voice I'd never heard her use on me, said, "Karen, why do you always have to make everything so dramatic?" I couldn't speak. "Mom wanted it simple," she went on. "Breezy, rehearsed. Greg explained it all. You're getting emotional and twisting it. You've always been like this, you know? The martyr. Always have to be the one who suffers the most. Emphasize." Honestly, Karen, it's a little exhausting. The sister whose hair I braided, the one I picked up at midnight, she used everything she knew about me, every soft spot I'd ever shown her, and pressed on all of them at once. Called my grief drama, called my devotion an act. That betrayal didn't come from a stranger or a greedy brother. It came from the one person who knew exactly where it would hurt the most, and she aimed there on purpose. I sat on my mother's kitchen floor that night and cried in a way I hadn't since I was a child. Not over the house, over Diane. The retention booster. But what I found in my mother's old writing desk the next morning changed everything. I couldn't sleep, so at dawn I went into Mom's room and opened the desk where she kept her letters. Looking for nothing, looking for her. Tucked inside an old address book was a small envelope with my name on it, in her handwriting. A note, dated 2 years ago. "Karen, my darling, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I want you to know the truth. The house is yours. You earned it with your love. I've made sure of it. Whatever they try, trust Mr. Abernathy's old file, Mom." She knew. Somehow my mother had known they might come for it, and she'd quietly built a door they didn't know about. I brought the note to Mr. Abernathy. His face changed as he read it. He pulled my mother's original will, the one she signed 3 years earlier, fully lucid, properly witnessed. The house went to me, explicitly, with a line that read, "Softly, to my daughter Karen, who I trust will care for me, with my deepest love." Then he picked up the phone and called the notary who'd stamped the new will. That was where the slow part began. And I'll be honest with you, it was the longest, tensest stretch of my life. Because the truth doesn't move fast. Money and lies do. The truth has to crawl through paperwork. At retention bluster. And the deeper they looked, the worse it got for Greg and Diane. The notary, a young woman named Paula, came in 2 days later. Greg's lawyer had already filed to defend the new will, calling Mom lucid and willing. And for a few days it was my word in a handwritten note against 2 siblings and a stamped legal document. I learned what it feels like to be the one telling the truth and still losing. There was a first hearing. Greg sat across the aisle in a $500 suit, calm, confident, leaning over to whisper to his attorney like a man who'd already won. Diane sat beside him in pearls, dabbing her eyes for the judge, playing the heartbroken daughter. She didn't look at me once. Not once. The judge didn't rule that day, or the next week. There were filings, delays, a continuance. Every night I went home to that empty house, not knowing if I'd lose it. Greg's lawyer sent me a letter offering to let me stay in the house for 6 months out of family kindness if I dropped my challenge. Kindness. They wanted me to thank them for the right to pack slowly. I almost broke. I was out of money. I borrowed against nothing. There were nights I thought, just let them have it. Just let it end. And then I'd reread Mom's note. Whatever they try, she knew. So I stayed in it. And then, in a quiet hearing on an ordinary Thursday, the whole thing finally cracked open. Paula the notary took the stand. Under oath, her hands shaking, she told the truth. They told me the woman was just resting. Mr. Mallory said she was tired but lucid. There was an elderly woman in a wheelchair, turned away from me. He held her hand over the page and he moved it for her. I never saw her face clearly. I should have. I'm so sorry. Then Mr. Abernathy entered the hospital records. And those couldn't be charmed, or cried at, or spun. The hospital's own log showed continuous sedation from Sunday afternoon onward. Tuesday's nurse note read 4 words. Patient unresponsive, comfort care. There was no moment of clarity. There never had been. They wheeled a sedated, dying woman into a room and used her hand like a stamp. I watched Greg's confident face go gray. I watched Diane stop dabbing her eyes, because there was suddenly nothing to perform for. The judge's voice turned to ice. The new will was declared void on the spot. My mother passed away 9 days later. I was holding her hand when she went. I told her she was safe, that she could rest, that I had handled everything. I like to believe she heard me. At the funeral, Greg and Diane stood across the room, and for the first time in their lives, neither of them could meet my eyes. But the consequences they were about to face went so far beyond a voided will. Because what they did wasn't a family disagreement, it was fraud, and forging a will under those conditions is a crime. The court referred the matter forward, and once that machine starts, charm and pearls don't slow it down. Greg's real estate business ran entirely on one thing: people trusting him with the biggest purchase of their lives. When word got out that he'd been charged with defrauding his own dying mother, that trust evaporated overnight. Listings pulled. Partners walked. The bank he'd been begging for more time called the loans. Within a year, the business he'd betrayed his mother to save was gone anyway, sold off in pieces to cover what he owed. He lost the very thing he sold his soul for, and he carried a fraud charge into every job interview for the rest of his life. And Diane, who went along to stay in Greg's favor, and to protect that perfect image she polished so carefully. Her name was on the filing, too. The story stud through every circle she cared about. The friends she performed for, the country clubs she name-dropped, the whole curated world. They didn't see a grieving daughter anymore. They saw a woman who tried to rob her unconscious mother. Her second husband, a man who married the image, didn't stay for the reality. He filed within the year. She'd called me dramatic, a martyr, exhausting. And in the end, she lost the only thing she'd ever truly worked for, which was what other people thought of her. The mirror she lived in front of cracked, and everyone saw what was behind it. I won't lie and say I felt triumphant. I felt tired and sad. None of it brought Mom back. None of it healed a family that was broken long before that lawyer's office. But I'll tell you what I did feel. I felt seen. The truth was on the record now, in a court, in my mother's own handwriting. The world knew who stayed. The world knew who was loved. And the two who tried to write me out of the story ended up writing themselves out of everyone's self. I still live in that house. I planted my mother's roses again this spring. Some evenings I sit on the porch with a cup of the good coffee, the kind I used to put back at the store, and I let myself buy it now, without doing the math. Diane sent a letter last month. 3 pages. The word sorry in it more times than I could count. I haven't decided what to do with it. Some things take longer to forgive than others, and the ones who know exactly where to hurt you are the hardest of all. They thought they could decide my mother was gone while she was still breathing. But she had one more breath in her than they counted on. One letter, one truth, and it turned out to be louder than every lie they told. Rest easy, Mom. I'm still right here.